Is the Monday, January 27, 2014 Public Works Finance Committee. We're starting a few minutes late because, just to make sure everybody knows whose fault it was, the Administrative Committee ran over. But we're going to go ahead and work our way through our agenda as well. To my right is Dan Carscallon, Council Member. Pull that door, please, Bill. To my left is Art Betke, Council Member. The gentleman shutting the door to the noise in the hall is Bill Belknap, who is Acting City Supervisor. And taking minutes today again will be Stephanie Kalaz. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the January 13 minutes.
I move their approval.
A good, and three goods, Bill. So we will consider them approved. The second item is presentation of the financial report for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2012-2013 by Mr. Don Palmer, Finance Director, City of Moscow. Welcome, Don.
Thank you. We have two quarterly financial reports to present today. Both required by state statute. And so the fourth quarter is the first report I'll provide you. It's the fourth quarter, which is the last quarter of the fiscal year 2013 financial report. And it represents expenditures for basically all 12 months, representing that quarter. The revenues I'll just go through the general fund in total was $12,160,000 was expenses of, or excuse me, that was budget. $12,221,915, and then expenses of $12,048,947. The differences between, there's a column called original budget and final budget, and they may be different. The reason that for the differences, we did an open budget in August of last year, and that mostly reflected grants, donations. So if there's a change, that's mostly the reason. Or it could have been a project that was unfinished in the prior year that was carried over into the 2013 fiscal year. The expenditures, you'll find that in all of the general fund, street fund, Parks and Rec, 1912, arts, transit center, water, sewer, sanitation, fleet, and information systems are the operating funds. And then I'll get to the capital project funds later in the summary section. Of note, most all of the operating funds are on track, for the exception of perhaps the arts fund, and the reason for that would be simple. That budget requires transfers to sustain the operating fund for the arts fund, and we had backed off $40,000 of transfers from the general fund to the arts fund. In the transit center fund, the reason for that difference is because we put seed money. It was a brand new fund in 2013, and that seed money was about, I think it was $20,000. The sewer fund is of note because it shows an $11.9 million budget, but we refinanced bonds to the tune of $6.3 million last year, and we needed to show the beginning fund balance as a resource, and then the offsetting expense to refinance the bonds and pay those off. They were actually sitting at U.S. Bank Trust Department, and we did that in 2012. And then those funds were called in November of 2013, which is why this occurred. Excuse me, in November of 2012, which would have affected the 2012-2013 fiscal year. So
our fiscal year, just for people watching, runs from
October 1 to September 30
of the following year.
Yes.
Okay.
So that saved about $800,000 over the life of those bonds, and a reason why we refinanced them. The other funds seem to be tracking nicely. Unless there's specific questions about that, I won't get into that. Of note, in the capital projects funds, there are some negative revenues. That's because in August of 2013, I took to City Council recommendation that was to sell a bunch of bonds. Our investments were losing investment income to the tune of $1.9 million. We had earned over the previous, since 2005, $6.9 million, and the turn of the economy with interest rates climbing between the months of April and September were unprecedented. So the way the bonds work is that as rates rise, your bond prices fall. And so just think we had $28 million in bonds during the course of 2013, and we shed all but $8.5 million of those bonds. But just think about one bond and as pretty much the way it works. And while we're getting income from those bonds, the price or value of the bonds, if you realize them, end up being a real loss. We exercise that loss to mitigate any future losses, and so it was prudent to do that at that time. So I wanted to point that out.
Didn't we still, though, come out ahead if you looked at the full term of it?
If you look at back from 2005 to current, yes, we came out about $5.8 million ahead over that lifespan of those bonds. So yes, we did come out ahead.
But there was the potential of losing most, if not a lot of that.
Much more if we hadn't. So the question comes up.
You effectively, I hate to put it this way, but you stop the bleeding.
It's rather to cut my arm off than to cut my neck off. So if I was to put it in a health term. So if you look at the capital projects funds, which is the water construction, sewer construction, sanitation, and capital projects, those funds, well, except for capital projects, are negative, and the reason for that is because of what I just provided you. And the reason the capital projects is not negative is because we had other resources in that fund, such as grants. And then the sewer construction, there's a number of funds that were unexpended, and so those projects are slated for future years. If you have any questions, that summarizes we collected $37 million in revenue and expended $47 million in expenses. Part of that has to do with what I mentioned before. $6.3 million of it is in the refinancing of bonds. The other $4 million would be in accumulation of funds of monies that we have expended towards capital projects. And I pretty much summarize all of that.
Makes sense to me. I've heard this a few times, though.
Art, you have any questions?
Nope. That sounds good.
Okay, so if I may.
You may.
The next report or agenda item is the first quarter 2014 financial report. And within that report, it's pretty early to discuss anything because not much is happening in terms of other than payroll related to revenues not coming in on track or expenditures doing that either. I think of note, probably most noteworthy is the fact that the revenues that haven't come in are the quarterly revenues such as revenue sharing, sales tax, liquor tax, those sorts of things that come in every quarter, highway taxes.
Order usually
Dan
just
would
came
know.
in last week, so.
Yeah, so in this report it is through December 31st, so that represents 25% of the year, and those revenues came in after the December date. So so having shown the revenues that don't come in, we're sitting at 13% for the year for general fund, 11% for the street fund, 10% for Parks and Rec, 1912 centers a transfer, so it's fairly steady. Arts fund is the same, and transit is also the same. Water, sewer is the base fees are coming right on track with the water revenues, so therefore you would see that. Commercial, the same thing on revenues as far as a consumptive fee. Sanitation fees, again, the same. So I really don't have much to comment. Everything's pretty tracking in terms of user fee revenue for the enterprise funds.
Don, a couple of questions, if I can interrupt you. With your state funds, this budget was created in May, June of last year.
Correct.
and your state funds, some of your state funds are just now coming in January of 14.
Correct.
Are you seeing anything different from what you anticipated? Are we getting more? Are we getting less? Can you tell yet?
No, it's pretty early yet. I actually didn't know that the January revenues came in just yet, so appreciate that comment. But no, I haven't really gone through and checked those. I've been working on year-end audit for the most part for the last 2 weeks trying to get that done. So I haven't followed up with the January revenues yet. But no, I did spot check a lot of the user fee revenues, and we were tracking right on track with where we expect it to be. And because just for information, we passed a rate study here a couple of years ago, and sanitation revenues are implemented, water and sewer last year, and those seem to be just tracking. In fact, sewer's up a little bit higher than what I would have expected by 1%.
I guess then one of the things to ask is how is the garbage fee income, sanitation, that income happening as far as changing over to the totes? Are we seeing
Actually,
sharp increase or?
Interesting. I was looking at that revenue stream today because it's part of the management discussion analysis that I needed to do as far as differences. The implementation of the roll cart did several things, and the rate study did several things. It added new fees that we didn't otherwise have, and it did away with some fees that we no longer have. For example, the landfill fee is a new fee that we implemented over a year ago. When you look at everything, and then what the roll cart did was provide equity for all consumers, meaning that everybody now pays a fee for either volume or the base, which is what we used to have, and now it's rolled into the roll cart program, except for the on-demand. And what we've seen, we've not raised fees. This will be going into the third year of that, where we said we would not raise fees at all. What the integrity of the system's done is it's raised fees overall $96,000 out of almost a $4 million. Our income has gone up, and I attribute that to the equity issues that were involved.
Is this a good part of Tim Davis's $120,000 analysis of losses due to abuse of the misuse?
We won't say they're abusing it, they're just
misuse, non-use of the tag system?
I believe it is.
Okay.
Yes. We have better accountability. The software is actually helping us too, because we're able to take a picture of any discrepancies, and then they're emailed from the truck instantaneously to our office. And so that when a vendor calls and says, "Hey, you missed me," we can immediately respond with an email saying why that happened, or if they were overcharged, or extra garbage.
When the truck went by, the cart wasn't out.
Or there was extra garbage there, and we can charge you for that. And here's the picture if you want to see it.
Yeah.
So that has curbed. We had tons of phone calls when that first started. From the month of August 1st, 2013 is when that started. And they've settled down a lot. And we've right-sized, which is really important. It was a lot of work, and there was a team effort on not just Tim's part, but Tara and Joelle and Henry Ann and Cassie.
Larger carts for larger users, smaller carts for smaller users.
Exactly, and it's worked out real well. But to answer your question, Bill, to watch again, 96,000 higher. So,
one other question I've got. On the water fund revenues, this is 25% of the year.
Yes.
And water revenues are showing 24.21%, and yet we're not in the summer of 2014 lawn watering, real using season. Are we running ahead?
Well, I was surprised by that too, so I went back and looked at that. And the base fees are tracking right on track. The commercial base fees and commercial consumption are tracking right on track. And so that leaves the volume piece for the residential piece. And so I'd have to go back and look at September's, but I would guess that September was fairly warm, and and we collect that revenue in October. So I'm wondering if that might be part of it. But we're not very few percentage points below normal on the residential consumptive use. So that brought it down to the 24% level. So
Okay.
I think what we're going to see is in the next quarter, we'll be in the winter months, and you'll see the volume piece of the revenue drop considerable, because that isn't no longer summer, and we are on flat rates at that point. And sometimes what happens too is if you have a seasonally warm fall and you go into winter, and what we do winter averaging, it could the averages could be artificially higher than normal. And what ends up happening is when we do the adjustments for actual...
You're not reading meters because of being winter, you're working from averages and estimating bills.
Correct.
And that could start falling off.
What could happen is when you actually do the read and you build too high because of an artificially late, a real late fall, warmer fall, and you're still irrigating, what could happen is that in the month of March, revenue drops to a negative, okay? And that's happened in the past. We've been pretty good about that recently, just because of recently being in the past 2 years, and haven't had that happen in 3 years, but it did happen 3 years ago. And so I don't know what to expect this year, but it might happen again.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't have much to comment in terms of the revenue expenses. We're tracking, if you notice, right on with city revenues and city expenses. I was looking at the expenses, and a lot of the dues and fees have come in on a lot of different departments, and so that was one thing I noticed. Office supplies the same. We have Gary and I have worked with the managers of all the departments in the past, and we tried them not to buy big ticketed items until after January. So
January 27th is best.
anyway, so any questions?
I think it's rather remarkable that on a almost $8 million quarterly budget, you're within $11,300 revenues to expenses, or you're over revenues over expenses, $11,300. I don't think you can hit zero. Anything?
Nope, it's just learning the ebb and flow of fiscal years and what happens when.
Because I blended the two reports together, if you would approve those, I'd appreciate it.
I would move their approval, and let's go ahead and throw them on.
Second that, yes.
Put them on consent? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you, Don. We appreciate it. Okay. Tyler, let's talk streets and tree and bush and other such trimming, sir. Yeah, you'd rather be plowing snow. Well, stay tuned. You might get some before the week's out.
All right, we'll hope so.
Just to set this up, Tyler came before us upon request 3-odd months ago, maybe?
Yes.
With talking about this topic, and we had some questions, and he's gone back and gotten more information and coming back to share.
If I can just jump in real quick, just to start, as you're just indicating, we were here in the past on this issue. What's in the packet tonight actually included a action or recommendation for an action to pass this on to the City Council. And looking a little further at it today, I think it's probably not quite ready to go there, mainly because there's not actually a policy written in your packet. So you're kind of missing something for that action. So what we're suggesting today instead of that is Tyler's going to give you a report on what he has been finding in his research on policies and approaches of other jurisdictions around the area and how they may be applicable here. And then there will be some questions as to how we want to do that as it pertains to notice and costs and those types of things. And then the thought being that, from here, get some direction from this group, then we can go back and actually work up the written policy to come back here at a future meeting and then carry it forward to council after that.
Okay, so you're not looking for any action other than to get the report, make any suggestions or comments we've got, And this has to do with, as I said, bushes and trees in the city right-of-way.
That's correct, yeah. As Councilman Steed stated, we were here previously. We discussed what the city's policy had been for dealing with vegetation in the right-of-way. We were asked by this committee to do some research on what some of our surrounding municipalities were doing, and so if with everybody's blessing, I will give a brief overview of what the trimming policy is for the sake of those who might not have been here last time. Our pruning policy.
You are.
The city has a pruning policy that is based on Title V, Chapter 8. Basically, it says that we need 8 feet clearance over sidewalks. We need 12 feet clearance over the roadway. That obviously, the sidewalk is fairly apparent. It's so people, even tall people, can walk down our sidewalks without hitting trees, and that we can keep them clear. And the roadway is for a variety of things. Street maintenance. We run sweepers along the curb line. Delivery trucks, any number of things, just to keep the clearance over the roadway.
And this is not a policy, this is an ordinance.
That's correct.
Okay.
It was updated 2 years ago to include things other than just shrubbery and trees and vegetation. We get things, occasionally people will install things that overhang the right-of-way. We'll get, basketball hoops and these sorts of things. So that was a more recent update. The way that we've conducted the trimming for the past...
I'm going to interrupt you and ask Les. Anything to report on the basketball hoop issue that you brought to us? I didn't realize it was 2 years ago. It didn't seem that long.
It's actually been amazingly quiet. People seem to have gotten the word out fairly well. They received the word, and we really haven't had any issues or complaints. It's been very amazingly quiet.
By and large, people seem to understand that we've got to plow snow and do other things, and that maybe the street's not the best place to send the kid to play, and it's been pretty calm.
Okay.
For the past 3 years, 4 years ago, we revised some policies just internally as far as how we conducted the trimming. We have the city divided into 4 areas. We conduct trimming in one of these areas each year. We have a notification process by which we take door hangers out and place the door hangers on all of the properties in the area, letting them know what it is that we're doing, when we'll be there, and what they can do otherwise. And so what this form basically says is that we'll be coming through at a certain date, that the resident is welcome to have the trees trimmed themselves. And
these are door hangers?
Yes, these are door hangers. They're welcome to have the trees trimmed on their own. We also give them a number to the Parks Department where they can acquire a list of City of Moscow licensed tree service contractors. And we let them know that otherwise city crews will be around to perform the trimming on that date. This hanger also includes a diagram on the back side to help them understand what it is that we're looking for. There's an additional door hanger that goes on corners that has to do with sight triangles. And the sight triangles just have a different requirement, so that the corner lots will receive this notification as well. And this just lets them know that there is a 10-foot requirement for the clearance over the sidewalk within the sight triangle, rather than the 8-foot, because that's what's required for the visibility in the sight triangle.
So that's not a mistake. That's intentional.
That's intentional.
10 on the corners, 8 on the straightaway.
10 on the corners, 8 elsewhere.
Go ahead.
Relative to the sight triangles, is there any aspect to it that includes vertical sight lines? Because I'm in an area where you have streets doing this, and when your side street comes in at the bottom of one of those troughs, and you look up, and there's a tree that fits the 12 feet, but it doesn't go far enough the rise of the road, so people coming over the top of the hill suddenly appear as if by magic only feet away. Is there a vertical aspect that should be
the measurement is based from the road surface, and so if there's if we have a lot that the elevation comes up on rather quickly, then the vegetation would be measured from the road surface. That's the clear area.
And that still doesn't cut it, because then when you're sitting at the bottom looking it up, at it, even though that tree's where it should be, it's still obscuring the road further up, and with the speed limit, there's a car there that fast going full speed, and it leads to interesting conundra at these intersections. So is there a possibility that you have to have sufficient sight to see far enough up the road, given the speed limit in that area, to accommodate?
We have our site triangle requirements. We have not pursued the topography as far as, requiring people to dig back soil on a lot or retain it, if I'm understanding correctly,
No,
that
it's
you're talking.
tree stuff, tree branches.
Looking up and seeing tree branches instead of the top of the hill, basically.
So if you're in an intersection, you've got a road that takes off vertically with the 10-foot standard where you are, you're not going to be able to see through the base of that tree. Yeah, that, as Tyler said, that's not something we've generally pursued. I think it's an occasional item. Obviously, they're out there. Most likely, if we identify those, we would need to address them on a case-by-case, work with the property owner to say, this is the minimum under the ordinance.
Be something that you'd have to ask them as a favor to do because it's not within the scope of the ordinance?
The site triangle standard, I do not believe, addresses that vertical aspect. So it would probably have to be something we would negotiate with them as to whether they'd be willing to work with us on that.
But the tree,
There are safety aspects when it comes to, those kind of intersection issues, and you might be able to bring that forward as a reason to have it done.
I think somebody's fixing to come tell you what we not only might, but can do. Rod Hall, City Attorney.
Thank you. On the site triangle thing, that's pretty much by statute. I don't think there's anything that we could make somebody do on the height of it specifically, unless it was deemed a hazard and we sued them. But I don't think we would go that route. But the issue about people coming down, the speed limit is 25. Well, at that particular place, the road may be posted as a maximum speed at 25. But if there's that trees there that creates a hazard, the speed limit there is no longer 25. It's whatever, however you can do it safely. So it's probably, the speed limit would be less than 25 at that point. So legally, that's what.
The fact, Les and Rod, the fact that, let's presume this tree we're talking about is in the public right-of-way, do we not have the ability to trim it?
It's our tree.
At
It's
that
our
point, if it's
tree.
in the right of way, then I think we would
Trim it to whatever height we felt was
Or
needed,
take it out.
or if the case happened, remove it.
if it needed to be. Yeah.
So if you have this on your block at your house, I would suggest you get with Les or Tyler, and y'all go take a ride. Thank you, Rod.
We digress.
Any other site triangle
Nope.
questions?
Nope.
So that's the notification that will go to all the corner lots so that we can deal with the site triangle issues as well. It was quite a big revamp. Previously, crews were just going out and they were just trimming, and it was kind of on an ad hoc basis. They'd go out if they got a phone call or a complaint. If there was something that the sweeper driver came back and said, hey, I just banged the sweeper against this, but there wasn't a notification process, and so it wasn't as customer friendly as we would like, because people would come home and all of a sudden their tree had been cut and they weren't sure why or what was going on and hadn't had the opportunity to perform the work themselves if they preferred to.
Before you go too far, still, you have your 4 areas that you do every 4 years, but if there's a problem in Area 4 when you're on Area 1, you'll notify that person, because we still got to take care
That's
of
correct.
whatever at that time.
We will still respond to complaints or problems that are brought up internally in whatever area, and then we're on a 4-year rotation with the rest of the areas. The goal with the 4-year rotation was really, it gave us a manageable chunk,
Right.
and it made it so that we're getting back quickly enough that it doesn't get really out of hand. And so that's been helpful. We're getting, this next year will be the first year that we're rotating back through and coming. We'll finish our last area this year, and the following year will be.
Depending on what type of vegetation.
Yeah, yeah. Some of them are pretty quick. This is the EPA document that just talks about some of the best practices and why it's important to have a good street sweeping program, and especially to get into the curb line. The curb line is where a lot of that sediment, the heavy metals, will accumulate. We want to keep those out of our storm system, which is one of the main reasons that we sweep. And so it's really important that we're able to access those curb lines with our sweeper. These are just some quick pictures. I'll just flip through really fast. This just shows some of the problems that we run into when the curb line is stuffed up with vegetation. We can't access the storm drain grate that you can see there on the right. efficiently to clear the debris off of it. It can cause flooding. It'll cause premature degradation of the roadway system because as water, the gutter is engineered to take water, and if water can't get down the gutter, it pushes it out on the asphalt. And so we'll have areas of asphalt, they have water, and then the water will be sitting in the crack between the curb and gutter and the asphalt, and we'll get infiltration of water. It causes a lot of problems that way. Some of the main concerns that we'll get are just about, some of these shrubs that were let go for quite a while. When we trim them back initially, they're not as pretty. This was an area that we had to patch because the very thing that we were talking about had happened. The shrubs had overhung for such a long time that water and wet debris had sat on the asphalt, and it basically just rotted the asphalt away along the curb line.
For the record, that was not my car.
This is an area that we trimmed. This was 1 year after trimming. It was an area that there was quite a bit of concern from some of the local residents because we had to trim that shrub back quite a bit. And I just do this to illustrate that, typically they grow back and they're pretty aesthetically pleasing. Sometimes initially they can look not as pretty, but it's a pretty necessary process that we go through. This is another example of just an area that we've trimmed back to keep it out of the roadway.
Can you go back in your pictures for a couple, the ones that are really hanging over the street? That's a good example right there. I mean, one of the issues we run into as well when you see this type of thing is if you're parking next to this, where is your car going to be? And normally we want to see the car at the curb line, right, because you want to be in that 7-8 foot wide parking area. But in a case like this where you've got 2, 3, 4 feet overhanging into the street, if somebody's parking there, they're parking much further out into the street, very possibly into the travel lane areas, which then reduces the passable, usable space out in the street. So that's another challenge we run into.
This particular location's 6.5 feet out, and there's a car typically parked there, and so it pushes them quite a ways out. This is just a picture that I throw in as an example. You can see this is one of our sweepers, and it'll take quite the beating as it goes down the roadway. But when we get some of the deeper scratches like that we'll get from the vegetation, it can become a hazard. And especially, I'm sure you guys have seen the sweeper operator. A lot of times his head's out the window and he's looking down at his brooms, and we've more than once had guys come in with black eyes or lacerations on their face from catching shrubbery as they drive the sweeper. So it's pretty important for a lot of reasons. That's the basis of our program. One alteration that we made based on the suggestion of a resident last year, which we implemented this year, was they asked to be notified the fall prior to the next spring's commencement of trimming. They said that some of their shrubs and trees, it was better to trim them at a certain time of the year, and which made sense, and so we made that update. And so so last fall we notified the area that we'll be trimming this spring to give people plenty of lead time.
That allowed the homeowner to make arrangements if he wished to have it trimmed when he wished.
Correct. Okay. So he could trim it at the appropriate time with whomever he would like to have trim it if they'd prefer not to have us trim it.
We're going to trim it in the spring.
We're going to trim it. We're coming through. The question, what we were asked to do some homework on was neighboring communities and how they were dealing with this, because we do not charge the residents when we go out and trim this. It's been a service that we've provided, that we go out and if it needs trimming, it's trimmed. The city of Lewiston conducted trimming 5 years ago. They had similar problems to what we were running into, and they hired a firm to come in and do the trimming. They trimmed the whole city in 1 year, and then they billed the residents where they performed the trimming. From what I've been told by staff in Lewiston, it wasn't the most popular thing, but they got it through that year. That was 5 years ago, and they're looking at needing to do it again this summer, and so they're contemplating another round of hiring a contractor to come in and trim and then bill where need be.
Doing it in the same method.
Yes, hiring a contractor, just giving them a map of the city and saying, tell us where you trim, and we'll send out bills. The city of Pullman does it. The Parks Department's responsible for the trimming. It's done on a complaint-only basis. So, and those complaints can be generated either internally or from a phone call or from a resident. They do cite the property owner where they do have to respond and trim. There's a $150 citation. The city of Coeur d'Alene, the urban forester, is responsible for it. The Parks and Streets Department work together in conjunction with the urban forester, and anything that's in the city right-of-way, they have a trimming program annually similar to ours, and so they don't bill for it. They just go and trim as they need to trim.
Provide notice?
No, they do not provide prior notice. They go through and, similar to what the power company does, they'll just go through and trim. The city of Post Falls also has an urban forester that is responsible for the program. The forester and the Parks Department work together. The forester will dictate where trimming needs to happen, and they do not have a formal notification process either. They'll identify problem areas. If it's in the right of way, they go and they trim them.
You know who they bill, or do they bill?
They do not bill. The city of Clarkston, the streets department's responsible. They do it on a complaint-only basis. They will notify the property owner. If they don't get compliance, they bill $25 for a first offense and then $50 for each subsequent offense at their property.
And they do the cutting?
If they have to do the cutting, they'll notify the property owner and ask them to abate the problem. If they don't, then they will go out and do the cutting and apply the fee.
So they're not doing time and materials, they've got flat rates?
They've got a flat rate that they'll bill.
Is it, so it's an actual citation?
Yeah, it's a citation. They call it an offense, and so it'll be $25 for the initial offense and then $50 for subsequent offenses. So yeah, Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene aren't charging their residents, and they're conducting the trimming. Pullman and Clarkson have a system that they do, and Lewiston hasn't got a formal system. They've just gone through and done massive trimmings. And
so it's a common problem.
yes.
Every city's got it.
Yes.
It sounds like we're a lot more humane than some of the other municipalities.
I think we have a very robust communication process associated with ours, and seems to be a rather kind process.
Yeah, I like what you're doing. I like the 4 quadrants, 5 if you don't have time to get it done in 4. I like the prior notice to give them a warning. The part that bothers me is doing it free. We got a letter to the editor last year because we did it free. They didn't like the way we did it. I don't know if there was a communication problem and they didn't realize that if they didn't do it, we would. I don't understand. I don't remember the exact details.
I think the incident that generated the letter, we actually never did perform the trimming there. It was the notification that he was actually responding to, and that particular resident didn't feel that he should have to trim because he didn't see the utility of it.
So did it end up getting trimmed?
It has not been trimmed yet.
Well,
Okay.
And frankly, that incident is part of what brought this forward for discussion here. And the fact that, do we have a formalized policy in how we approach this? So we want to make sure we're being consistent and fair in how we dealt with these issues. And that one was essentially just put on hold until we could work our way through this.
Like I say, personally, I like your program. I like the effort you're putting into it, that you're rotating around the city, that you're giving prior notice. The only hang-up I've got is the city paying for it. In other words, I think personally that if we have to cut it, we'll be happy to.
here's your
Bill, and don't criticize us the way we did it.
Yeah.
We do it the best way we can for what we've got to deal with, but you had an opportunity. That's just where I am.
I wonder if getting into the business of billing people puts forth either legally or by way of perception the idea that it's going to be done the way that the homeowner would like it done themselves. We put a fee to it. If we're doing it for free, you get what you get, and don't grouse because you had your opportunity to do it in your way. However, if we start charging fees for it, do we become encumbered to do it in a way that people would see
I could be
is
persuaded
appropriate?
to follow that reasoning, and we just start finding people and let them figure out someday they're going to have to get it cut themselves, or the bills are going to keep coming.
Yeah, because I recall something along the letter to the editor, someone complaining about the juniper business and how it's going to be hideous forever. And things like that.
As Tyler showed, they come back.
Is there a warranty implied if we charge a fee versus if we don't?
Well, if you're not charging it as a fee and more as a, I guess, a fine, I think that's the difference there. You've given them the chance to get it done in a professional manner, and I think even the fine that we would send them is probably still cheaper than hiring somebody to do it, maybe. But, I mean, I don't know. It depends on who you hire, or if you do it yourself. So,
Well, we apparently have the staff available to do it, since we've been doing it for 4 years
but
this
they
way.
could be doing something else.
That's true. You were going to, Rod, you were going to respond to the question about whether or not
We'd have to do
the
it every
city, the city doing it and billing for it creates any kind of responsibility for how we did it or something, I think?
No, as long as we did it in a professional manner, did it acceptable, we wouldn't have to go out there and, cut it a certain way unless we did it negligently.
And I should mention that all of our staff that we send out to do the cutting get certified through our Parks Department, through our city arborist. We're really careful. If they have something that they're not sure on, they'll bring the arborist out and consult with them on doing it. They really try and do a conscientious job, and throughout the process, we try and stay in close communication with people and try and bend over backward on
We've
it.
never seen this particular bush before. Can we trim it without
Right.
killing it?
Yeah, these type of things. And there have been certain shrubs and bushes that the arborist has come out and said, you know what, this isn't the time of year. If you guys can wait until fall, and then we put it on a schedule and we come back later. We've really tried to, I know that, the trees and being an arbor city is an important part of what Moscow does and the identity of the city, and so we try and be very conscientious of that. But at the same time, we've got a job that we've got to get done, and so we try and do that as efficiently as possible.
Yes, sir.
Maybe just to follow up on the question about, is there an expectation about how it would be done? I think you could very easily modify the language within the door hangers. If this is a route you choose to take where we're going to, in essence, bill folks for the service, to indicate that you have the opportunity to do this. If you choose not to, the city will perform the work meeting city standard, which may or may not follow
May not be as
personal
good as for
standards,
you,
but city
yeah.
standards, and that you would be receiving a bill for that service. We'd have to figure out what that language is, but I think something to that effect, so that folks are aware.
Oh, yeah.
That yes, you're going to get billed for this, and it may not be quite what you have in mind, or you can do it yourself or have it done yourself. If that's the way
avoid a
you
lot of
choose to go.
problems.
Yeah, your notice currently says, otherwise certified city crews will perform the trimming. So you're telling them, you're implying that we know what we're doing, or more than implying, and it goes on to say, at no cost to the resident. So
That's where you would change it.
if the council wishes to do so, the change would be,
I mean, I'll let them trim my trees for that. Go for it. But
We get quite a few of those. Yeah, we have a lot of people that they're like, yeah, pleased as punch to see them out there.
yeah, knock yourself out.
I don't have to haul it off. So.
And we have others that are nearly as pleased to see
Yeah,
them out
I
there.
imagine.
Okay. What do you wish to do, gentlemen?
Again, I think we're just accepting a report right now because, as I said at the beginning, they're still waiting, trying to formulate their policy. So,
I guess the one thing would be, that we'll go ahead and write the policy from this point, assuming you're comfortable with that. The question then becomes, what's the method?
yeah, do
And
we
could,
bill for it?
If you'd
Or
like,
fine,
we
or-
could set it up as it is right now.
Could you do an A and a B?
Have an alternative for discussion at the council level that says, here's an alternate where we actually charge folks.
I mean, and I think a stepped, well, let's just call it a fine. I mean, that's about what it is, kind of like what they do for the fire alarm responses.
Well, are you going to
If you're
call
going to
it,
keep coming back, then it's going to get greater as we keep
are
going.
you going to call it a fine, or are you going to bill for service?
I'd like to see billed as service. Fine is awfully pejorative.
Well,
And could get pushed back.
it is, and some of them may be a lot less trouble than the guy next door. One guy may take $200 worth of effort and three trucks and 4 guys, while the other one is a guy with a hedge clipper and he gets through in 15 minutes. I mean, they're all
different- there are
when you're
different
dealing
levels.
with 6.5 feet of overlap.
So were you talking an hourly rate?
Yeah. I'm talking about
And
T&M.
and we can explore that of, we can talk with Rod and finance both about what's the best way to structure that, whether it be, here's a flat rate that we're going to charge, per hour, or just flat rate, or is it a cost of materials type of rate. We can work our way through that and bring it back.
And Tyler and his people know what they run into out there.
Yeah.
So they can talk less in terms of, there's a huge, variety in the amount of time we spend per place, or, hey, 99% of them are X,
Right.
or 30 minutes and
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
And then that might be some kind of flat rate. Bring it back
2 weeks?
as soon as you're ready. Is 2
Yeah,
weeks
we'll
too
shoot for
short?
2 weeks if we can, but we'll bring it back as soon as it's ready. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Art?
Yep.
So-
But looking at his pictures, I'd say from the nature of those pictures, just outlawn junipers would solve a whole lot of problems.
They're one of our biggest headaches.
Oh, man.
My wife would like that.
So we'll prepare, just to clarify, we'll prepare 2 versions of the policy, one.
Unless you
with
discover
me
a
and one with
third.
Another. All right.
All right,
Okay.
thanks.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you. Okay. Les gets to stay put to handle an item entitled Southeast Moscow Water and Sewer District Services Agreement. And I don't know, we've got 2 ladies here from the Southeast Moscow Sewer District. I don't know whether you wish to have them come up now, or,
Well, I will introduce them,
Okay.
and if there's a desire along the way to engage them, just feel free to ask them to come
Okay.
join us. Lois Pritchard is the president of the board for the Southeast Moscow Water and Sewer District, and Marge Nelson is the secretary
join us.
treasurer for the district. Before you today is a proposed draft agreement between the city of Moscow and the district, and this is intended to replace an agreement that was the last done in 1991. Just for some history for folks that may not be as familiar with this, the district constructed a sewer collection system and pump station and force main back in 1980, 1981. When the district was originally formed and really got into the business of doing what the district does. At the same time, the district then contracted with the city of Moscow, 1981, to provide essentially the treatment of that sewage that's collected within the district boundaries. And so their system was constructed in the early 80s, tied to the city system. It then passes through the city system and onto the city's wastewater treatment plant for treatment. That 1981 agreement was subsequently replaced with a 1991 agreement. We've now reached the end of that agreement, and over the last year and a half or so, we've been working on what the new one would look like. We've actually done some extensions on the 91 agreement to get us through the end of 2013. So we're slightly past the last extension, all right, on the last agreement, but we're continuing administratively. to just
don't worry, we're
continue
not going to go
function.
put a cork in it.
Yeah, we haven't turned the pump station on or anything like that.
Not a concern.
Yes, so we're continuing as per normal. So what's before you then, here is a new draft agreement that essentially takes the 91 version and updates it to reflect changes in the system, changes in rates, changes in billing methods, those
Shortens it,
types of
too.
things. I think it did a little bit.
Several pages.
To essentially provide us an updated, refreshed version. Now, the intent when I submitted this was to ask this group, after review, to consider moving it on to City Council next week, but I have received some comments and suggestions today on some of the content that I think we're going to have to look into a little bit further. So with that being said, I think it's probably not quite ready to go to full council. And so what I'd like to do today is try to answer any questions that you may have regarding the draft. I hope you've all had a chance to read it, and take in any comments, suggested edits and such that you may have that we can then add in, along with the ones I've received so far. We have also been working on some of the exhibits. You'll notice if you're paying attention, at least one of those is missing. We found it this afternoon. So I think we've now got those as far as what the original exhibits are. Some of those are going to require probably a little further updating and based on some things that we've seen today as well. So that will take us a little bit of time. All that being said, we still are outside of our current contract extension, and so suggestion is that we would go to council next week with a an extension, probably for, say, 90 days. We'll pin that down for sure. But I would say 90 days, essentially from the first of the year, take us through the first 3 months to allow us to finish those last items that have come up, update some of the attachments that are here as well, and hopefully get it to the point district will have further chance to review it and make sure it's just really ready to go and bring it back to you at that point for further action and consideration.
So you'd, jumping ahead, you would bring it back prior to the 90 days so it could be acted on by council and by their board prior to the expiration of the 90 days?
That would be the intent, yes.
Okay.
But I want to make sure we have enough time to get through those steps, those processes.
So is this
Questions?
a new agreement?
This is a new agreement. One of the things that's missing out of this agreement is the fact that it does not state that it supplants previous agreements. Okay, that was brought to my attention this morning. And so the other agreements really have expired.
Right.
So in essence, you
I guess
don't really
technically
have
it
to
would,
say that, but for clarification's sake, it's probably a good idea to say that, it replaces any previous agreements from 1981, 1991.
And I noticed
Just for
that
track.
the old one, lists a lot of like prohibited items into the system and things like that, where the new one just says, comply with the EPA, basically. It shortens
It
it by about 20
streamlines it a
pages.
bit, right, and there were a couple of paragraphs. The original one was still working under the assumption that it hadn't been built yet.
Right.
And so there was a lot of, we're going to go construct this, and we're going to do that. 91 kind of carried that language forward.
Just
So we
basically
tried, in this
rubber
case, we
stamped it.
tried to clear out some of that because it's already in place.
Right.
So now it's more of, okay, if you're going to expand, you have to meet the standards adopted
Mm-hmm.
by the district and the city, which are one and the same. Those types of things. And so the meat of it is still there. Some of the things that were outdated have been trimmed out, and I think that's probably why it's a little bit shorter.
Now, that brings up a confusion on my part. There are 3 older documents in our packet, is that correct?
Yes, there are 3.
And I think Dan just called them agreements. I don't see them as agreements. They're one-party documents. They're not signed by the city.
That's correct.
They are a memorandum or
Resolution is.
resolutions of the district board.
That's correct. The first.
So is there a true agreement out there signed by both the city and the district,
Well, that was the 1991 agreement that this first document replaces.
which we don't have?
I have not given you a copy of the old one. I can certainly do that.
No, I was just making sure that I hadn't missed something.
We have the 91 agreement. We have the 81 agreement.
But those are not in the packet.
Those are not in the packet.
Okay, thank you.
You don't have those there.
I was getting a headache.
The exhibits are the same exhibits that were applied starting back in 1981.
Right.
Okay, they have not changed.
They were attached as exhibits.
In 81, again in 91, again in 14. The first 2 exhibits are resolutions of the district that they passed back in 1980 that essentially establish, that we're going to have sewers in the district, and then establish what the rates are going to be within the district. And exhibit number 3, which is missing, that we've just found, is the one that says, and here are the standards that this district is adopting, which happen to be the 1978 City of Moscow standard specifications, which I have sitting on my chair back here right now. That's number 3. And then number 4 is an agreement between the sewer district and the North Latah County Highway District that says, yes, sewer district, you have permission to have your utilities within highway district rights-of-way. Okay, and that was an important step along the way because the sewer district owns no ground. And so they had to have permission to go somewhere. In this case, they went in the highway district right-of-way. That agreement is number 4. That agreement also has expired and will need to be addressed by the districts, plural. And so they're aware of that, and they'll be working on that also.
Following on that, the district has since late 1980s had collection sewer lines in the city of Moscow. And I don't think they have any agreement with the city of Moscow to have those lines within
City public
the city
right
public
of way.
right-of-way.
That's probably
There's
a very good
another,
point.
the next one.
There's another good one. Yes. So, there's something else for us to read right away.
Is there any order in which these have to be accomplished to make subsequent items work? Like, does it have to be agreement with the highway district first and then Moscow second?
I don't
Does it matter?
think so.
Not in terms of that, but some of this other stuff will need to be in
I mean,
order.
there's stuff that just has to be in there.
Les, I
And
would
it may be
just,
that the language in here needs to address, current agreement or any later additions thereof, such as with the highway district, because they'll adopt a
let
new,
me throw an idea out.
certainly.
Get away from those internal district resolutions and use fresh
I think that's,
other documents regarding construction requirements, et cetera, so that when the city and the district sign this document, it encompasses what both want at the present time. Because the old documents talk about rates and fees and dollar amounts that are nowhere near what the current situation is. And I think to try to refer back to those, you're going to write a huge document just saying which paragraphs of the old ones don't really apply anymore.
And we can do that. Part of the challenge there is, of course, the district was not terribly active, really, for a period of time up until about 3 years ago now.
when the agreement started just expiring.
Yeah, well, and there's a new group, essentially, that's now on the board and making sure the district is being active and doing all it needs. But my point in bringing that out is the fact that some of those things that were done back in the 80s as far as rates and standards have not been updated since that time. And so that's where some of the dilemma lies, is then what do you reference? And if they've not updated anything further, we could do it through the means of, the district will charge what the city charges as the city adopts by resolution on an annual basis.
Yes.
And as long as the district agrees to that, there you go. So that may be the way to best address something like that.
And ladies, this is not to say that it's the city's way or the highway. Don't misunderstand this. Y'all have to agree to it, whatever it is. But this needs cleaning up. It's just not clear to, in my opinion, to a third party walking in, picking it up, understanding what we're trying to do together. And if y'all are as new at this as I think Les is indicating, it may be to your benefit not to have to refer back to a 1981 document and try to figure out what in the world were they talking about back then.
What were they thinking?
What were they thinking? Yeah. So you need any other questions about the documents from either of you two?
No, I think
Echoing your sentiments there exactly. A third party walking in completely safe.
or a new board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just speculating whether 90 days would be enough.
I'm thinking 6 months. Might
Yes,
be,
180 days is fine.
might be June 1 or...
I would just put a June 1 date on it.
Because by
let's-
the time you do it, it
Yeah,
gets to
'cause-
us, we get through our meetings back.
Yeah, there may be enough here that it may take enough time to do that, especially if we want to incorporate
Yeah,
What was the
that's going to
expert-
take a
the
couple.
highway district
What
issue.
was the date of last expiration, not extension?
The last email I had from Gary said now I don't know who he went to, that it was good through the end of January.
That was the extension.
The original contract from 1991 expired on December 1st, 2012.
Then we extended a year.
Extended a year, and then we extended it to the end of the year
And
of
then-
13. And so that's where we are right now.
And then Gary sent me that we were going through January, but I don't know
Sure we
by
got that.
email.
I don't believe the council did that. I think we went
think
through
so.
the end of December. Rod Hall, a question, please. Let's let Rod jump there for just one. Okay. Any legal problem with putting an additional 6-month extension on this? I mean, we're already out a year.
I think we'll probably just do an amendment to the extension that we already have and agree to do that and bring that up to council to approve.
Okay, and you're not getting nervous about the fact that we're pushing these extensions out for whatever, for the good reason of trying to get a new document done?
No, I think everybody's working in good faith to, I mean, it's a serious issue. We're just not going to let
Right.
that stuff happen.
Okay.
Let's call it July 1, so it's an actual 6 months through June, so.
And this, I mean, the intention of the new agreement, it will be a new agreement.
Right.
I believe. And it looked like it was in 91, there was an amendment that clarified some things from the 1980 agreement.
Okay. Good, Bill?
Yep.
Okay,
That's fine.
We'll prepare a letter
Consent-
of agreement for extension.
Consent agenda, and if any,
For the extension.
for the extension.
Correct.
And if any of the other three council people have questions, they can pull it, and we can talk about it.
All right.
Ladies, thank you. Sorry you had to wait through all the other fun stuff to get to your part, but that's sometimes how it works.
Thank you.
Now, if you need to do trimming out in the district, you know who to come talk to. So you can find your manholes.
They're on the road.
Or the right-of-way, the
On the right-of-way,
state right-of-way,
yeah.
I think, like that.
Okay, that concludes our meeting today. No other items,
No
Bill?
other items?
I say we adjourn.
I would agree.
Agree. We are adjourned. Thank you, one. Thank you all.